I discovered something about 40 years ago that changed how I understand wealth, and it contradicts almost everything you've been taught about generosity. My grandfather showed me 3 things that, when protected carefully, create the foundation for lasting prosperity. When given away carelessly, they drain your financial life, no matter how hard you work. I'm Rabbi Solomon, and what I've learned from decades of studying ancient Jewish texts and counseling thousands of families is this: your financial struggles may have nothing to do with how much you earn. They may have everything to do with what you're unconsciously giving away. The moment I understood this, I was 19 years old, standing in my grandfather's study with a check in my hand made out for $5,000. Every penny I'd saved, working 2 jobs through high school and my first year of college. I was about to hand it to my best friend for a business venture that sounded promising. My grandfather walked in, saw what I was doing, and his face changed. He gently took the pen from my hand and said something I'll never forget. "Solomon, if you give this away right now, you're not just risking money. You're about to violate a principle that will keep you poor for the rest of your life." I didn't understand. I told him it was just money. I could make more. He sat down heavily in his leather chair, the one that creaked in exactly the same place it had creaked since I was a child, and he pulled out a worn copy of the Talmud from the shelf behind him. The pages were soft from decades of study, the margins filled with his handwritten notes in fading ink. He opened to a section he'd marked years before and read to me in Hebrew, then translated. There are 3 things a person must guard as carefully as a watchman guards the city gates. These 3 things are the vessels that hold prosperity. When you give them away, you create holes in the vessel, and no matter how much blessing flows to you, it will drain right back out. That afternoon changed the trajectory of my entire life. I didn't give my friend the money. He was angry. He called me selfish. The friendship ended, and that hurt deeply. But within 6 months, his food truck business had collapsed. Everyone who invested lost everything. I kept my $5,000 and followed the principles my grandfather taught me about what never to give away. Within 1 year, that money had grown to $18,000 through opportunities I would have completely missed if I'd emptied my account for someone else's dream. That's when I began to understand. My grandfather wasn't just saving me $5,000. He was teaching me the fundamental principle that separates those who build wealth from those who struggle despite their best efforts. Now I need to be honest with you about something uncomfortable. What I'm about to share challenges the common narrative about generosity and giving. You've probably been taught that the path to prosperity is to give freely, to put others first, to never say no to people who need help. I was taught the same thing. But after 4 decades of studying both ancient wisdom and modern reality, I've seen a pattern that breaks my heart. The most generous people are often the most financially broken, not because generosity is wrong, but because they're generous with the wrong things at the wrong time. The Talmud teaches something that sounds harsh at first hearing. Your own survival comes before charity. Your own household comes before the community. Your own foundation comes before helping others build theirs. When I first read this, I recoiled. It sounded selfish. But the rabbis weren't advocating selfishness. They were describing spiritual law. You cannot give from an empty well. You cannot save others from drowning if you're underwater yourself. And here's what nobody wants to say out loud. Giving away what you cannot afford to lose doesn't make you holy. It makes you broke. And broke people cannot genuinely help anyone. Let me tell you about the first thing you must protect: your time without equal exchange. This sounds simple until you examine how you actually spend your days. Time is the only truly non-renewable resource. Money can be earned again. Opportunities can return. But time once spent is gone forever. The Talmud teaches that each day is a gift, and wasting it is among the gravest spiritual offenses. Yet most people give away their time constantly to people and projects that offer nothing in return. I learned this lesson the hard way. In my early 30s, I was building my practice as a financial counselor. I had a growing family mounting expenses, and I was working 70 hours a week just to keep everything afloat. A woman from my congregation asked if I could counsel her adult son about money. He was 35, chronically unemployed, and living in her basement. She couldn't pay me, but she assured me he just needed someone to talk to. I said yes, because I wanted to help. That was a Tuesday afternoon. I blocked out 2 hours. He showed up 40 minutes late with no apology. He spent the entire session complaining about the unfairness of the economy, the cruelty of employers, the impossibility of finding good work. I gave him concrete advice. Update your resume this way. Apply to these types of positions. Adjust your expectations here. He nodded along, but I could see in his eyes he had no intention of implementing any of it. 2 hours became 3 hours because he kept talking. I missed dinner with my family. I missed my daughter's bedtime, something I'd promised her I wouldn't do. The following week, his mother asked if I could see him again. He'd found my advice so helpful, I agreed, even though helpful apparently meant he'd done nothing I suggested. This pattern continued for 8 weeks. Every Tuesday, he'd show up late, complain, ignore advice, and consume my time. My practice suffered because I was giving away hours I could have spent with paying clients. My family suffered because I was exhausted and absent. And he remained exactly where he was, unemployed, unmotivated, unchanged. Finally, my wife said something that pierced through my misplaced sense of duty. You're not helping him. You're enabling him. And you're stealing from our children to do it. Every hour you give him is an hour you're not earning for our family or spending with them. She was right. I told his mother I could no longer meet with her son for free, but I'd be happy to see him as a paying client at my standard rate. I never heard from them again. And here's what broke my heart. I felt guilty. I felt selfish. I felt like I'd failed to be generous. But 3 months later, I ran into his mother at the grocery store. I braced myself for confrontation. Instead, she thanked me. She said when I stopped seeing her son for free, she stopped enabling him financially. Within 6 weeks of both of us cutting off the free support, he'd found a job. Not a dream job, but a job. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to stop giving away what people should be earning or working for themselves. Your time is not infinite. When you give it away without fair exchange to people who don't value it, You're not being generous. You're being foolish. And poverty rewards foolishness. Here's what equal exchange means. It doesn't always mean money. Sometimes time for time is fair exchange. Sometimes skill for skill, connection for connection, genuine gratitude and reciprocity. But one-way rivers, where you're always giving and never receiving, those are not spiritual. Those are drains. I had to learn to ask myself 3 questions before giving my time. Can this person afford to pay me or offer fair exchange? If yes, why aren't they? Will helping this person genuinely improve their situation, or am I enabling dysfunction? If I give this time here, what am I taking it from? My family, my health, my paying work. If the answers reveal I'm giving away time I can't afford to lose, I've learned to say no. Not angrily, not resentfully, but clearly. I wish I could help, but I need to protect my time for my own responsibilities right now. Most people respect this. The ones who don't, the ones who pressure and guilt and manipulate, those are precisely the people you should never give your time to. They've already shown you they don't value it. The second thing you must protect is your money to people who won't repay. Notice I said won't, not can't. There's a profound difference. Someone who cannot pay you back due to genuine hardship deserves charity. Someone who won't pay you back because they don't prioritize their obligations to you, that's something else entirely. And lending to people with a pattern of not repaying isn't generosity. It's financial self-destruction. My cousin Michael taught me this lesson. When we were both in our mid-40s, he called me desperate. His business was struggling. He needed $12,000 to make payroll, or he'd have to lay people off. He promised to pay me back in 90 days when a big contract came through. We'd grown up together. I loved him. I gave him the money. 90 days came and went. No payment, no call. When I finally reached him, he said the contract fell through. He needed another 6 months. I understood. Business is unpredictable. 6 months passed. Still nothing. Now when I called, he didn't answer. When I did reach him, there was always a reason, always another crisis, always another delay. A year became 2 years. I stopped asking because it was damaging our relationship. I felt awkward at family gatherings. He avoided me. And here's what hurt most. I saw him buy a new car during this time. I saw him take a vacation. He had money. He just didn't prioritize paying me back. Meanwhile, I had loaned him money I'd earmarked for my own business expansion. Because that $12,000 was tied up with him, I had to delay hiring the assistant I desperately needed. I had to pass on an office space opportunity. I had to keep scrambling to cover my own expenses, and I realized something painful. By lending him money he wouldn't repay, I'd hurt both of us. I'd enabled him to avoid facing his business problems, and I'd crippled my own growth out of misplaced loyalty. 3 years after the loan at a family wedding, I watched him laugh and drink and celebrate. No mention of the debt, no acknowledgement of what he owed me. I felt invisible, I felt used, and I finally understood what my grandfather had tried to teach me. When you lend money to someone with a pattern of not repaying, you're not helping them. You're subsidizing their irresponsibility, and you're stealing from your own family's future to do it. The Talmud is very specific about this. Lending to those who will repay is a mitzvah, a blessing. Lending to those who habitually don't repay is foolishness. The text even says you should not lend to someone who has not repaid previous debts unless they've demonstrated genuine repentance and change. This isn't cruelty. This is wisdom. Because chronic non-payers are teaching you something important. They're showing you that they don't value your sacrifice, and continuing to give them money is teaching them they don't have to. I eventually had to write off that $12,000, not legally, but emotionally. I had to accept I'd never see it again, and I had to set a new boundary. I would never again lend money to family or friends unless I could afford to never get it back. If I couldn't afford to lose it, the answer was no. This boundary saved me from decades of financial drain because Michael wasn't unique. There were others over the years who asked. Some I said yes to when I could afford to gift it. Most I said no to because I couldn't. And the beautiful thing, the relationships that mattered survived my no's. The relationships that ended when I stopped giving money, those were never real relationships anyway. They were transactions disguised as connection. Here's how to protect your money. If someone asks to borrow and you can afford to lose that amount, you can consider it, but frame it as a gift, not a loan. If they pay you back, wonderful surprise. If they don't, no damaged relationship. If you cannot afford to lose it, the answer is simply no. No explanation needed beyond, I'm not in a position to lend right now. If they pressure you, if they guilt you, if they question your love or loyalty, because you won't give them money that tells you everything you need to know about their character. Protect your money from people who won't protect your relationship. The third thing you must protect, and this is the one most people don't recognize, is your attention to negativity and drama. Your attention is more valuable than your time or your money, because your attention creates your reality. What you focus on expands. What you feed grows. And if you're feeding your mind with drama, gossip, worry, fear, and negativity, you're creating a poverty consciousness that will attract poverty no matter how hard you work. I see this pattern constantly. People who are financially struggling spend hours every day consuming content that makes them anxious. News about economic collapse, social media posts highlighting everything they don't have, family drama that has nothing to do with them, gossip about other people's problems, complaining sessions disguised as friendship. They're giving their attention, their mental energy, their emotional bandwidth to things that generate fear and lack. The Talmud teaches that worry is among the worst spiritual offenses because it demonstrates a lack of faith in divine provision. But beyond the spiritual element, there's a practical reality. Your brain cannot simultaneously hold thoughts of abundance and thoughts of scarcity. When you fill your mind with negativity, there's no room for the creativity, opportunity recognition, and problem solving that create wealth. You're literally programming yourself for poverty. I had to break this pattern in my own life. I grew up in a family of worriers. Every dinner conversation was about what could go wrong. Every news broadcast was analyzed for threats. Every success was immediately followed by speculation about how it could be lost. This was the water I swam in. I didn't even recognize it as unusual. But in my late 20s, I noticed something disturbing. I was succeeding professionally, but I felt constantly anxious. I had money in the bank, but I couldn't enjoy it because I was always worried about losing it. I had opportunities in front of me, but I couldn't see them because I was focused on potential disasters. My wife, bless her, finally said something I needed to hear. Living with you is exhausting. You find problems in everything. You see threats everywhere. I'm tired of defending joy. I realized she was right. I was giving my attention to an endless stream of what could go wrong. And that attention was poisoning my ability to experience the good that was actually happening. I decided to try an experiment, a negativity fast, 7 days of no news, no gossip, no complaining, no worry conversations. 7 days of deliberately directing my attention toward gratitude, opportunity, and solutions. The first 2 days were almost physically painful. I didn't realize how addicted I was to negativity until I tried to stop consuming it. My mind kept reaching for the familiar anxiety like a tongue probing a missing tooth. But by day 4, something shifted. I felt lighter. I noticed things I'd been missing. A business opportunity mentioned casually by a colleague. An idea for a new service I could offer. A chance to connect with someone who later became a valuable mentor. These opportunities had always been there, but my attention had been so consumed by worry that I couldn't see them. After those 7 days, I made the negativity fast a permanent practice. I stopped watching news. I stopped engaging in gossip. I stopped spending time with people whose primary mode of connection was complaining. Some people thought I was burying my head in the sand. But here's what actually happened. My income increased by 30% within 6 months. Not because I worked harder, because I was clear-headed enough to recognize and pursue opportunities I would have missed in my previous state of constant anxiety. The Kabbalistic teaching is this: your consciousness creates your reality. If you hold poverty consciousness thoughts of lack, fear, scarcity, you will create poverty. If you hold prosperity consciousness thoughts of abundance, opportunity, gratitude, you will create prosperity. This isn't magical thinking. It's about where your attention directs your energy and actions. You move toward what you focus on. Protecting your attention means being ruthlessly selective about what you allow into your mind. It means recognizing that every minute spent on social media comparing yourself to others is a minute not spent building your own life. Every hour watching news about economic disasters is an hour not spent learning skills that increase your value. Every conversation spent gossiping about other people's problems is a conversation not spent solving your own. Now I want to address what you might be thinking. This sounds selfish. Protecting my time, my money, my attention, doesn't that make me self-centered? Here's what I've learned. There's a profound difference between selfishness and self-preservation. Selfishness is hoarding resources you don't need while others suffer. Self-preservation is securing your own foundation so you can genuinely help from a place of overflow. You've been taught that giving everything away makes you virtuous, but I've watched generous, kind-hearted people destroy their finances and then become bitter, exhausted, and unable to help anyone. The airplane oxygen mask analogy is overused, but it's accurate. You secure your own mask first, not because you matter more, but because you cannot help anyone if you pass out. The same principle applies to your time, money, and attention. Protect them first. Build your foundation. Create your overflow. Then give generously from genuine abundance. That kind of giving multiplies. It creates sustainable impact. It doesn't drain you or create resentment. So what should you give away? The Jewish principle of tzedakah, righteous giving, provides the framework. You give 10% of your income after you've covered your basic needs and started building security. Not when you're struggling, but after your foundation is secure. That 10% given from overflow carries more spiritual power than 50% given from desperation. You give knowledge and wisdom freely, but in ways that don't drain your time. Write it down, record it, create resources people can access without consuming your hours. Teach people to fish rather than fishing for them indefinitely. You give to those who genuinely cannot help themselves, the elderly, the disabled, children, those facing true hardship through no fault of their own. This is pure charity with no expectation of return. But you must distinguish between someone who cannot pay you back and someone who will not. One deserves your help. The other is teaching you to enable their dysfunction. I've lived by these principles for 30 years, since my grandfather taught them to me. I've watched my financial life stabilize and grow, while I've also been able to genuinely help thousands of people. But it only worked because I first stopped the 3 leaks. I stopped giving away my time without fair exchange. I stopped lending money to people who wouldn't repay. I stopped feeding my attention to negativity and drama. Once those vessels were secure, prosperity could accumulate instead of constantly draining away. If you're struggling financially, despite working hard, I want you to honestly examine your life. Are you giving away your time to people and projects that offer nothing in return? Are you lending money to people with patterns of not repaying? Are you consuming negativity that creates poverty consciousness? These aren't character flaws. They're learned behaviors from a culture that confuses enabling with love and martyrdom with virtue. But they're keeping you broke, and you don't have to continue. Today can be the beginning of a different approach. You can start protecting what needs protecting. You can begin to distinguish between genuine generosity and financial self-destruction. You can secure your own foundation so that when you do give it, comes from overflow rather than depletion. This isn't easy. It requires going against everything you've been taught. It requires setting boundaries with people who benefit from your lack of boundaries. It requires saying no when you've always said yes. But here's what I've seen happen hundreds of times over 4 decades. When people finally protect these 3 things, their financial situations begin to shift. Not overnight, not magically, but steadily and genuinely. Opportunities appear that were invisible before. Energy returns that had been drained away. Clarity replaces the fog of constant crisis. And wealth begins to build because the vessel is finally intact. The 3 things to protect are simple to state, but challenging to implement. Guard your time. Give it only where there's fair exchange or genuine impact. Guard your money. Lend only to those who repay or give amounts you can afford to never see again. Guard your attention. Feed your mind with what creates prosperity consciousness, not poverty consciousness. These 3 practices are the foundation. Everything else builds on this. If you've found value in what I've shared, I explore these ancient wisdom teachings about prosperity every week. Consider subscribing if this perspective resonates with you. And if you know someone who's trapped in the pattern of generous poverty, working hard, but never getting ahead, this might offer them a framework for change. The comment section is a place where many share their own experiences with these principles. You're welcome to join that conversation. Let me close with the blessing my grandfather gave me that afternoon when I was 19. May you have the wisdom to know what to protect and what to give. May you build vessels strong enough to hold the abundance meant for you. May you prosper not through selfishness, but through sacred self-preservation, so that your overflow can bless generations. Your poverty serves no one. Your prosperity built on the right foundation can serve everyone. It begins with protecting these three things. Go and guard your prosperity as carefully as you would guard your own life, because in the deepest sense they are the same thing.